SCP-212 Object Class Safe. SCP-212 is a large medical device with 3 large robotic arms. The arms have an extremely diverse array of attachments, but no storage area or power source has yet been found. Attachments slide into and out of the arms as needed, with over 500 different attachments documented. SCP-212 is made of plastic, steel, and other common materials. An in-depth analysis is pending, as any attempt by mechanical means causes violent action from SCP-212, and attempts by any biological means normally results with subject's improvement. When exposed to living tissue, the arms of SCP-212 will rapidly move to grab and restrain it. SCP-212 would then begin to improve said tissue. The process is extremely fast, but SCP-212 does not inject any anesthetic to replace any blood loss. The process has been described as excruciatingly painful and can result in the death of the subject at a rate of 47%. Wounds made by SCP-212 are closed with standard surgical sutures and a chemical sealant that is not yet fully understood. Improvements that have been observed include lining of joints with graphite, replacement of biological organs with artificial ones, addition of metal plates to bones, additions of new or duplicate organs, and replacement of teeth with small serrated steel bands, among many others. SCP-212 has been shown to be able to totally reconfigure an organism. The improvements appear to be random and can sometimes be detrimental or fatal, as described by one subject's complete loss of bone marrow and its replacement by a gel that is still under study. Subjects wishing to undergo exposure from SCP-212 are to be advised that the process is extremely invasive and that no predictions on improvements can be made. Special Containment Procedures. Use of SCP-212 must be cleared by the current containment site's chief medical officer. Any subjects undergoing operation by SCP-212 must submit to full physical and psychological testing both before and after exposure. Resistance to testing will result in termination of subject. All personnel are to keep at least 1.5 meters 5 feet from SCP-212 when not in operation. Armed personnel are authorized to use whatever force deemed necessary to prevent unauthorized exposure. Should any personnel accidentally become exposed to SCP-212, full quarantine, testing, and judicial review will be initiated as soon as the subject is released by SCP-212. SCP-212 Upgrade Log. Record of exposure to SCP-212. Attention! Any and all exposure to SCP-212 is to be recorded and logged. Unreported exposure to SCP-212 will be met with termination. All subjects willingly exposed to SCP-212 must have O5 command approvals, as well as that of site medical staff. Subject: Agent, 28 years old, 64 kilograms, 183 centimeters tall, African American descent, submitted a request on approval granted and exposed on. Description of upgrades. Lower jawbone replaced by super dense ceramic jaw, teeth replaced with blades made of the same material. Spine removed and replaced with synthetic polymer. Replacement spine grafted to base of skull. Ribcage and pelvis coated with thin layer of ceramic. Lungs, eyes, and liver removed and replaced after cleaning. Subject status: active duty. Notes: SCP-212 will appear to clean some organs or tissues. It will run several attachments over the tissue, each of which will spray, scan, cut, or otherwise interact with the tissue before replacing it. When tested, these clean tissues appear totally free of genetic defects and appear younger than the surrounding tissues. Subject: Dr. 42-year-old, 62 kilograms, 170 centimeters, Caucasian, British descent. Submitted request on Approval granted and exposed on description of upgrades. Teeth replaced with super dense ceramic, feet amputated at the ankle, replaced by a thin plastic lattice work with several pads on the bottom. These pads are capable of sticking to any solid surface and can carry up to 225 kilograms. Bone marrow removed and replaced with a blue gel. Heart, eyes, liver, and kidneys removed and cleaned. Several metal devices inserted into the brain for unknown purpose. Subject status. Subject died during the removal of bone marrow. Foot pads removed and are currently under study. Subject. Agent A.A. Suffered severe injuries resulting in traumatic amputation of all four limbs and removal of spleen, left kidney, right lung, and left eye. Cranial trauma caused by a shard of circuitry piercing skull and entering left frontal lobe of brain. Submitted request on approval granted and exposed on description of upgrades. Contrary to expectations, SCP-212 did not remove the shard of metal from the subject's brain, instead spending approximately 7 minutes analyzing the circuitry with a variety of lenses, probes, and sensors before apparently determining that the foreign body could be left in place. SCP-212 then proceeded to integrate said circuitry into subject's frontal lobe more fully, utilizing tracery made of room temperature superconductors. SCP-212 ended by administering an unknown chemical that immediately placed the subject in a coma, then shut itself down. No attempts were made to replace severed limbs or repair damage to bodily organs aside from normal cleaning. As of, subject remains in a chemically induced coma in stable condition. Foreign circuitry in brain appears to be spreading at a geometric rate. Estimate complete replacement of biological brain tissue in subject. Agent 34 years old, 112 kilograms, 176 centimeters, Caucasian, German descent. Submitted request on approval granted and exposed on description of upgrades. Removal of stomach, intestines, large and small, liver and kidneys, organs replaced with 2 sacks of synthetic tissues attached to the esophagus, esophagus lined with the same tissue. Sacks produce an acid capable of breaking down steel and transfer all nutrition directly into the bloodstream. This process produces no waste, and any indigestible matter is expelled up the esophagus and out the mouth. Eyes replaced with optic sensor pads capable of seeing visible, infrared, and ultraviolet light spectrum. Hands removed at the wrist and each replaced with 8 metallic tentacles, each measuring 3.8 centimeters long. Subject status. Medical leave until to allow adjustment to new internal structures. Subject. D. 23 years old, 62 kilograms, 178 centimeters, Caucasian American descent. Previously exposed to SCP-217 and decontaminated once the virus had run its course. Full mechanical conversion achieved. Approval for testing granted on description of upgrades. Subject status. Subject escaped containment, overpowering 2 armed personnel and effortlessly bypassing several security measures. Subject recaptured after 2 hours, having caused casualties and injuries, as well as deactivating. Once recaptured, subject requested SCP classification, presumably in an attempt to avoid termination. Request was denied, and subject was dismantled. Components were incinerated following examination and documentation. Subject. Agent. 25 years old, 93 kilograms, 188 centimeters, African American descent. Submitted request on Approval granted and exposed on. Description of upgrades. Skin replaced with nanomaterial mesh of thick tubes coated in microscopic barbs. Tips of fingers and toes replaced with carbon claws about 8 centimeters long. Limb bones restructured for quadrupedal stance. Heart and lungs replaced by single organ with a second similar organ as backup. Digestive system cleaned and shortened significantly. Left eye replaced with ultrasound sensor. Subject status. Stable but behaving erratically. Contained pending psychological analysis. Subject. Doctor. 26 years old. 142 kilograms. 200 centimeters. Multiracial descent. Subject was rendered fully blind on due to accidental exposure to SCP. Submitted request on. Approval granted and exposed on. Description of upgrades. Removal of both eyes, orbits widen to meet and form a single oval cavity. Cavity is lined with metallic structures resembling large cilia. Amputation of both hands, stumps fused together, and several small limbs resembling crab pinchers grabbed to the forearms with no apparent pattern. Teeth removed for cleaning. Teeth with fillings discarded. Remainder replaced. Subject status. Deceased. Subject had begun undergoing medical imaging when he began to suffer extreme pain, describing the sensation as "it tastes all wrong." The cilia-like structures then reshaped into sharp points and extended rapidly in length, many piercing the subject's brain. The gripper limbs continued independent movement for several hours until the subject was incinerated. Subject D5354, 22 years old, multiracial descent. Subject was scheduled for disciplinary action and had consumed a last meal consisting of seafood. Subject was already deceased when exposed to SCP-212. After spending 4 minutes analyzing and probing subject, SCP-212 dissected subject, carefully removing the stomach and intestinal tract. Stomach was then opened, and a bioluminescent lobster-like organism was constructed from its contents. Subject status. After removing and altering the subject's stomach contents as described above, rest of subject's remains were discarded. Subject. Mummy of Intef II, pharaoh of the 11th dynasty of Egypt, circa 2063 BCE. The mummy had been collected during a research expedition by the Foundation's predecessor entity in the early 19th century. Description of upgrades. SCP-212 spent 25 minutes analyzing subject and ceased activity without having altered subject. Following this, Dr. Morrison directed that the 4 canopic jars that were collected from NF II's tomb also be placed in the containment chamber. SCP-212 then reactivated and used a scalpel and a heating tool to make minor alterations to 4 amulets and the mummy's wrappings before again ceasing activity. Subject status. Apparently unchanged, except that the aggregate mass of the subject appears to have decreased slightly. Subject D5442, 27 years old, Japanese-American descent. Description of upgrades. SCP-212 removes the subject's thumbs and nose. It scans for 3 minutes before replacing the nose with a silicone version and implanting a thin plastic tube within the nasal cavity coated in an unknown blue mucus. Subject status. Subject struggled to breathe and described a pleasant smell. The subject expired 1 hour later from asphyxiation. Subject, a white laboratory rat. Description of upgrades. The tail was removed and SCP-212 began to alter the skeletal structure to resemble that of a bipedal organism. All organs were then removed except the lungs and heart. The additional space was then filled with a white paste which hardened. Subject status. Remains were incinerated after analysis. Subject. Corpse of MTF Nu 7, Officer Harold Goldman, Caucasian American descent. Mauled by an instance of SCP. which had left a large opening in the chest and abdomen. Several organs were devoured by the SCP. Instance. Description of upgrades. SCP-212 scanned the subject for 10 minutes before sewing the remaining pieces of intestines back together and repairing sections with a patch of synthetic tissues. SCP-212 then ceases activity after probing the areas where organs should be. Subject status: incinerated.